We're on the 412 Fantasy Show brought to you by Texas State Brazil.
Dude, unbelievable. Also, I wish. All right. 3, 2. Welcome to the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show, proudly presented by Crowworthy, where winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. Follow at Crowworthy on Twitter. Visit us at the crowworthy.com Pittsburgh City page for podcasts, blogs, and more. I am Smitty. With me, as always, is my co-host for the show, Donnie Druin.
Smitty, how's it going? Little late, but better late than never for our fantasy show. So I, appreciate you wiggling around your schedule.
Yeah, very true. Yesterday was our good friend and also YouTube video editor Sarge's birthday. So we went to a restaurant, a very nice restaurant, Texas State Brazil up in Pittsburgh, which is fantastic for his birthday to celebrate. So happy belated now to him. But that is why we were not doing the fantasy show yesterday. So we are back today. If you're watching us on YouTube, you're lucky because we almost didn't go on YouTube. We decided to do so, get some more content up on the YouTube page. So if you are watching, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you're listening back, be sure to go to the youtube.com/c/round the412 and hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That way you'll know when we go live, because we just kind of surprise people by doing so. So that way you would know if you had that notification bell hit. But yeah, we're back for week 7. I don't think that there's like a whole lot of injury news really to talk about this week, or nothing, like a Le'Veon Bell situation like we had last week. Talked about landing spots. Obviously, he's now in Kansas City. So we'll see how that whole situation shakes out. Clyde Edwards-Helaire looked like he knew that Le'Veon Bell was on his way to Kansas City the way he was running against Buffalo. So, but we'll get into that some of that stuff and more as soon as I tell you guys about Keats Barbershop. It's an old-fashioned barbershop. It's located at 180 Breton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. And then every Tuesday, he does $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Again, that's Keats Barbershop at 180 Breton Avenue in Rochester, PA. All right. So I also want to mention, as I always do, if you guys have like any suggestions for the show, be sure to just tweet at us and let us know, whether if you think it's like, criticism, that's fine. Like, we'll take the constructive criticism. We want to make this show, as good as possible for the people that are watching or listening to it. So we want your feedback, regardless of if it's positive or, if you have something negative about the show, something you're like, oh, these guys could do better on, we'll take that and we will work on doing that. There's something we talked about, is kind of like, are we too basic with the way that the show is run? And I have some cool ideas, I think, about how to change that up. But for now, and we've already kind of switched up what we do. For now, we're going to continue doing, our rankings, and then I have waiver wire, and then Donnie actually has a couple buy-sell questions he wanted to bring up. So that's what we got on today's ledger. So I guess we can kind of just jump right into it, and I will start out with my tight end rankings, which I am not thrilled about for this week. Going through, I was like, man, there's like 3 options that I really like, and 2 of them are pretty much, the standard number 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Especially with Baltimore on a bye with Mark Andrews not playing this week. So it really like thins out the tight end position. When Kelsey and Kittle aren't playing, it's going to be terrible. So I hope I don't have those weeks. But anyway, my tight end 5 for the week is going to be Hunter Henry, actually going against the Jacksonville Jaguars here. They are coming off of a bye. Justin Herbert looks really good. I'm not sure that Keenan Allen is 100%. And I mentioned that, with Mike Williams being a guy that I would target picking up. But Hunter Henry, we kind of talked about how important that tight end position is for these rookie quarterbacks, and Justin Herbert looks like a pretty good rookie quarterback. So, in a depleted tight end position, I think that Hunter Henry is a solid play. I think he's easily, tight end 1 play, especially with what you have at that position. But I have him in my top 5 this week in a matchup against Jacksonville that ranks, they're giving up inside the top 10 most points to the tight end position.
Yeah, I think everybody's concerned with Hunter Henry was how well was he going to mesh with Justin Herbert, and the answer to that question thus far is phenomenally well. We knew how talented Hunter Henry was prior to the Chargers taking a guy like Justin Herbert, and once they finally did pull the trigger, and they did have that rookie quarterback, we've seen Justin Herbert look 10 times, the quarterback we thought he was going to be at this time in his process. And Hunter Henry's been a very big part of that. Keenan Allen, his status is still kind of questionable up in the air. Justin Herbert loves to push the ball down the field, but at the same time, he loves checking down to a guy like Hunter Henry. And I think he's put together some really solid performances thus far.
Yeah, my man, Tyler Hurnley's already in the chat. We appreciate you, Tyler, as always. He actually has a Texas State Brazil about a half hour from me, or a half hour
Oh,
from him.
wow.
He said the Texas State Brazil is a half hour from me. I read it as me because that's what he said, but it's him.
Yeah.
It's actually like an hour from us, the one that we have to go to. But Trey Burton is on a bye too, a guy that's kind of stepped up for Indianapolis. What the heck is going on with that? Like, that would be so frustrating for me as an owner of one of those tight ends. Like, it's almost like how most people view like a running back by committee situation. Like, between Trey Burton now, who's running the most routes from that position for the Colts, and then you have Mo Alley Cox, who was like the standout guy for the first few weeks, and then Jack Doyle, who's like the most established guy in that tight end room. I mean,
yeah, their situation is almost what people expected the Chicago Bears tight end situation to be with their 40-man roster of tight ends over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, just week to week, it fluctuates so much, and it makes it so difficult for us fantasy football people to try to pin down one guy in that offense.
We also have a question. Do I trade Jefferson and Gibson for Mike Evans? Okay, so I'm assuming that's Justin Jefferson and Antonio Gibson for Mike Evans. And my answer to that would be no.
My answer to that to be no as well. Actually, me and good friend of the show, Logan Bell, were talking about Mike Evans a couple of days ago. I believe, and I'll have to look this up after the show, but I believe Mike Evans has at about a 10% target share with Chris Godwin healthy. Which is absolutely bananas. And now that Chris Godwin has kind of returned to full health, obviously, the Buccaneers aren't pushing the ball down the field nearly as much as they were with Jameis Winston, and Mike Evans is kind of the non-beneficiary of that. So I would definitely hang on to those two players.
Yeah, my thing with it, and you know what, it's funny is before the year I said that Mike Evans' 1,000-yard streak was coming to an end this year, even with the addition of Tom Brady, greatest of all time. It's a weird fit. And yeah, he's scoring, a bunch of touchdowns, but yardage wise, it's not there. And the touchdown production, I mean, can he keep up that pace? I mean, he's scoring a bunch of 1-yard touchdown receptions. I mean, I don't know. I think that's too, hit or miss to bank on.
Yeah.
And, the ceiling is obviously great, but how low is the floor? And that's what we talked about, at the beginning of the year, and why we both like Chris Godwin in that offense more. Now he's, obviously, dealt with injuries, missed a couple weeks. But assuming Chris Godwin's healthy, he's the guy for me in that receiver room that's going to put up the best fantasy production. And Justin Jefferson's been an absolute beast in Minnesota. So granted, he's not, Adam Thielen's the number one there, but Justin Jefferson has put up huge numbers as the number two.
Yeah.
And then you have Antonio Gibson, who, Washington's still trying to figure out what exactly they have in that running back room. Antonio Gibson is clearly the best running back that they have, but they continue to feed him like that. I believe JD McKissick has had back-to-back games where he's gotten a decent bit of touches and carved into that. I don't know what Washington is doing, to be honest with you. Also, they just recently signed Robert Foster, so congrats to him.
That's true.
Central Valley product. Went to school with him. But yeah, as far as that trade goes, I think that Justin Jefferson, is right there with Mike Evans, if not higher in fantasy production. And then, you're also giving up Antonio Gibson for that. So I'm not making that trade.
Yeah, I would say I value Justin Jefferson right now, not a lot more, but given that you would package a guy like Antonio Gibson in that trade, I would much rather hang on to those two guys as opposed to getting Mike Evans. I do understand the appeal for a guy like Mike Evans because, like you said, like the ceiling is phenomenal, but the floor week to week is just not solid enough for me to want to bank on trading like more assets to get him.
Right. Okay. Moving along at I'll monitor to see if there's a follow-up question or whatever. But my next tight end, my tight end 4 for this week is going to be TJ Hawkinson going against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, this is another top 10 matchup when you think about the amount of points that Atlanta is surrendering to opposing tight ends. And TJ Hawkinson, we've seen, him take a little bit of a leap here in year 2. Him and Matthew Stafford seem to be getting on, in more rhythm, on a better page. Obviously Kenny Galladay's the clear number one passing option for them in that offense. But for a team that is going to be, passing the ball first and foremost, we know the numbers that Matthew Stafford puts up. If TJ Hawkinson is the number two, and Marvin Jones, I don't know what's going on with him. He's been pretty much non-existent this year. So for me, TJ Hawkinson's been the number two in that passing game, and I think you could do a lot worse. And going against Atlanta here, like I said, they're giving up, amongst the top points to tight ends. So I really like that matchup. He comes in at my tight end number 4.
Yeah, I think the Lions offense has taken some time to kind of get their stuff together, just in terms of Matthew Stafford, getting his feet settled in 2020. Marvin Jones, like you said, has been fairly disappointing this year. Kenny Golladay has been the receiver we thought he was going to be. And TJ Hawkinson's kind of been the middle, continuous presence in that offense. He's getting better by the week. It doesn't look like it's going to be another Eric Ebron situation to where you take another tight end in the top 10 and he doesn't pan out. Hawkinson does definitely look like the guy, and he's produced decent numbers thus far. I don't think he's hitting Kittle or Kelsey numbers anytime soon, but you could certainly do a lot worse in fantasy this week.
Yep, 100%. Okay. My tight end number 3, not necessarily a great matchup. As a matter of fact, these guys do a pretty solid job of covering tight ends. I think that speaks to just the position itself in this week in general. Darren Waller going against Tampa Bay Buccaneers is going to be my tight end 3. And again, a defense that can cover the tight ends for sure. Those middle linebackers are very good. The safeties can cover tight ends. So this is going to be an interesting matchup to see how they do it. But I feel like a guy that no one's really talking about when you talk about quarterbacks that are playing pretty well. I mean, Derek Carr's having a pretty solid season this year, and no one's really talked about it. There's like a list of 6 or 7 guys that have been solid this year. I mean, everybody else is kind of stunk. And right now, Derek Carr's in those guys that are playing pretty well, which is kind of unexpected. But at the same time, when a guy's playing for his job, and I think he knows that, not Derek Carr, John Gruden did not draft Derek Carr. He was not around for that. So is he his guy? I mean, this year is going to determine that. And when it comes to Derek Carr this year, so far, so good. I mean, I don't know what the Raiders are going to be this year, but he himself has played pretty well. So, going in this matchup, I don't like the Raiders to win this game by any means, but I think that Darren Waller's volume in this game, even in a tough matchup, will be enough to get him, top 5 consideration, considering, again, the futility of the position.
Yeah, and I feel like Derek Carr's MVP campaign, while it might not be tremendously big, I feel like a lot of people are sweeping his 2020 season underneath the rug in favor for other teams. And like you said, quietly, he's been very well this year, and Darren Waller has been a very big part of that success. Waller's one of those guys where he's stupid athletic for the tight end position. His hands are as sure as almost anybody's in the league, and he just produces. He's a very big part of that offense, despite a guy like Henry Ruggs, finally emerging. Despite having Josh Jacobs catching balls out of the backfield, Darren Waller produces week in and week out, kind of irregardless of the matchup. So I really like him as tight end 3 behind the obvious other 2 that you're about to talk about.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned the obvious other 2. It's just going to be, what order do you put them in? Yeah. For this week in particular, I'm going George Kittle as number 2, going against the New England Patriots, and Travis Kelce against the Denver Broncos as number 1. Granted, I think that we talked about it before. Kelce's games against Denver, they're very up and down. He either has like a massive game or does pretty much nothing. And even if you look at Mahomes' numbers against Denver, he averages less than two passing touchdowns and closer to 1 interception than none against them. So Mahomes does not necessarily put up 262 passing yards as well as what he averages against them in 5 games. So Mahomes does not put up monster numbers against Denver. At least he hasn't. But you look at Denver's defense, I just don't think that they're the same defense that they've played in the past. So I like Kelsey's matchup there. Obviously, even if I didn't love the matchup, it's Travis Kelce. And then being number 2, Kittle against New England. New England, I can't figure out what they are this year. They're not a 500 football team right now, but that defense still is, I think the reason that they're going to stay in football games, and a lot of people opted out. But they're still covering tight ends pretty well. They are not. I think that they're close to middle of the pack, I guess, but they're on the back end of that. They're not inside the top 10 as far as giving up points to tight ends. So I think that Kelsey's matchup is a little bit better here, and that's why I would go with him. Also, in my opinion, at least, a much better offense as of right now. I just haven't seen enough from San Francisco's offense and Jimmy Garoppolo in general to warrant putting Kittle above Kelsey here.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the more underrated storylines with the San Francisco 49ers offense, that it just hasn't looked like it did last year. And granted, there's been a ton of injuries to both sides of the ball, especially concerning Jimmy Garoppolo in the quarterback position. But Garoppolo has not looked anything like he did last year. He doesn't look like the $1 million man they once thought him to be. And yeah, I completely agree. I just think Travis Kelce's situation is better. I think he's a better matchup this week. And I just think week to week he'll offer that better upside. And kind of touching on your point, I think the Patriots also have an identity crisis that they're facing as well. They don't know exactly what they are. When you have double-digit people opting out of a season, it's going to take a toll. You're going to have to find time to figure out everything. You're going to have to find time, to see what gels and what doesn't. And we're not even halfway through the NFL season yet, so the Patriots still have a lot of time to figure it out. But that being said, either Kittle or Kelsey are most starts every week.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those two every single week. Again,
Yeah.
Even in a tougher matchup, if I put Kittle at number one here and had Kelsey as number two, I'd still feel equally as confident with it that those guys are going to be number one and number two. So, but yeah, I don't know if you want to go to running back to receiver, but take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could stick with the pass catchers department. My top five this week is going to be kind of your standard. You see, a couple big names in here. I'll actually start it off with a guy who's not necessarily a big name on the national scale, but fantasy football people seem to love him. So my number five receivers are going to be Terry McLaurin, Terry F1 McLaurin, Ooh. Scary Terry versus the Dallas Cowboys defense. The Dallas' secondary looks awful. It looks awful right now. Their best cornerback is Trevon Diggs, a rookie. And you have Anthony Brown, who's basically the other cornerback too. That says a lot about the situation on the defense. The Cowboys, for whatever reason, have not looked great at all through 2020. Dak Prescott gets hurt, and they just get blown out of the water by Arizona on Monday Night Football on a national scale. Going into week 7, Terry McLaurin is the undisputed wide receiver one for the Washington Redskins. He's putting up the numbers. He paces the team in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. I'm not sure what his touchdown production is off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure he's the leading guy in touchdowns as well. He's the do-it-all guy for the Redskins. Sorry, the Washington football team. Excuse me. He's do-it-all guy for the football team. And yeah, I just really love the matchup, and I do see him finishing with a big day versus a weak Dallas secondary.
Yeah, I hope Tyler's still in here to hear you talking about Terry McLaurin, who was, obviously one of my favorite guys coming out of Ohio State. I knew he was going to be a steal taken at pick number 83. I knew he was going to be a better pro than he was college player. I mean, you go back and watch the tape, and it was just evident that this guy was going to eat up the league, and he has. He hasn't disappointed. And even in a very bad offense, he's just a target monster. And when he does get the ball, good things happen for that team. It's just not very often that good things happen for that team. So I think that what I'm getting at is just get him the ball literally every possible time that you can. And hey, in that division, you might win that division. Who knows? I have no problem. I love Terry McLaurin, so wide receiver 5, that seems fitting.
Yeah, and going from one winnable division to another, sticking in the same conference, I have DK Metcalf versus Arizona as my wide receiver number 4, and we'll talk about guys getting targets, week in and week out. DK Metcalf, I think to this point, is the wide receiver 1 in Seattle with Tyler Lockett there. Metcalf is slowly but surely taking over that number 1 role. He's been Russell Wilson's go-to guy. That was very evident in the week before their bye week whenever the Seahawks needed a touchdown to went to DK Metcalf 2 times in a row before they, finally got the ball in the end zone. Metcalf slid all the way down the board whenever he was first drafted 2 years ago. Everybody wondered why, and he looks like he's out to prove everybody wrong with that binky mouthpiece, But it's going up against the Cardinals secondary. I don't see anybody covering him, man. Byron Murphy is going to play more in the slot. Budda Baker, granted, he had his first interception last week. I don't see him being much of a force versus any receiver. And I honestly like DK to win a one-on-one versus Patrick Peterson, for as well as a career as Peterson's had. I just think Metcalf is a new, different breed that a lot of quarterbacks just haven't seen yet. So, I really expect his target share to continue. And DK Metcalf looks like a freaking beast. And that's why he's my wide receiver 4 this week. Sorry. Maybe this year too. We'll see. He's balling.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I have to agree with you that I think that he is the wide receiver 1 in Seattle now. But I mean, great complementary piece on the other side of him as well. If maybe it's a 1A, 1B situation, but DK Metcalf is the guy, it seems like, in that wide receiver room.
Yeah.
And that's with the quarterback being an MVP candidate, maybe the top MVP candidate. So that's a pretty good situation to be in for him, regardless of who the matchup's against. And you mentioned, for anybody covering him one-on-one, any cornerback, it's going to be a problem. We saw the problems that Stephon Gilmore, who might be the best in the business, had covering him. So it's not going to get any easier for a guy like Patrick Peterson, who's, at best in the middle of his career, more likely on the back end of his career. And he's still a very good player, but he's not going to be able to win the same way. He's going to have to give him space and just try not to get burnt if it's him covering him. Byron Murphy looks like, a pretty good second-year corner. I still don't see any way that he covers him one-on-one. And yeah, I mean, DK Metcalf is an absolute beast, and he's also a beast with a chip on his shoulder for the reason that you mentioned. So he's out to prove a lot of people wrong, and so far in 2020, so far so good.
So my number 3 receiver finds himself back inside of my top 5 after a long drought. I'm not going to say more than 3 words, but it's going to be Julio Jones versus the Detroit Lions, and those words are, guess who is back? Julio Jones finally reemerges himself as the receiver we all know and love him to be. 2-touchdown monster performance, finished in the top 5 this week in terms of fantasy production. And yeah, I'm really rolling the dice on Julio, finally figuring everything out. It looks like he's healthy. It looks like he's not going to be a decoy on the sideline any further. Knock on wood, we'll see if that can continue through the entire season. But when Julio Jones is healthy, we've seen what he can do. Obviously, we saw last week what he did, and I just think that's going to carry over. And what might be a shootout, versus the Detroit Lions offense that, may be able to go blow for blow with the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant to say this, but hopefully that's the word I'll use. Hopefully Atlanta's offense has more weeks like this ahead for them, because that's what they're capable of, so long as Matt Ryan can be even an average quarterback. When you look at having guys like Julio, Calvin Ridley, they gave up a second-round pick for Hayden Hurst. There's nice complementary pieces in Zacchaeus and Russell Gage as well.
Yep.
I mean, that offense should be much better than what we've seen. If they continue to perform like they did last week, there are huge fantasy days ahead for the likes of Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. And, Calvin Ridley bursting onto the scene this year, kind of trying to rip away that wide receiver 1 from Julio in Atlanta. But, Julio with a statement last week saying, I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. And if I am, I'm getting paid the bag if I'm going somewhere else. But I think my top 2 receivers are the standard top 2 week in and week out, just depending on the matchups. So number 2, Devontae Adams versus the Houston Texans. I expect Adams to rebound in a very big way after a very disappointing game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. Houston's defense ranks inside of the top 10 in terms of fantasy points allowed to receivers. And yeah, I just think last week was one of those weeks for the Packers offense. Nobody looked competent at all. And granted, Tampa Bay's defense looks very phenomenal. They're number 1 in the league in a lot of metrics. But coming off of a bye and coming off a little bit of an injury as well, it's going to take Adams a little bit of time to get back. He's got all of that out of the system now, so I'm really banking on the Adams-Rodgers connection being there. That's why he's at number 2. And then, number 1 receiver, the guy you've been pounding the table for since he was traded to the Arizona Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins versus the Seattle Seahawks. Wide receiver 1 going against the worst pass defense in the league. Seahawks defense allows 38.4 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and that's enough for me to put him at number 1.
Michael Thomas is back, right?
So he listed as questionable, and he officially missed last week because I guess somebody called him slant boy in practice. He didn't like that, so he punched somebody. But no, I do think they haven't officially announced that the suspension has been uplifted.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, there's no reason why he shouldn't play in the top 5. But it's really good to read it up. I didn't even think about Michael Thomas whoever putting this list together.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I knew that he wasn't going to. Once you got to like Devontae Adams and Hopkins, I mean, when you said this to be the top 2 every week, I was like, okay, well, Michael Thomas isn't in there. You had Julio at 3, and I mean, there's nothing that I can question about it, because who knows what that connection's even going to be like. Drew Brees has not looked good this year for the better part of the season, so I don't know what that's going to look like. But Yeah, I'm not. I wasn't asking like because I was like, oh, it's egregious. He's not in your top five. I was genuinely curious because I didn't know what the situation was like. But yeah,
No,
from
you're
what
good.
I
And
heard,
as somebody who just traded for Michael Thomas, I really hope he finishes top five this week.
yeah, from what I heard, Chauncey Gardner Johnson said that it was a that he deserved to be picked in round two.
Oh man, that's phenomenal.
No, but we did get a question here from Tyler that I'm just now seeing. Um, so he needs to choose essentially four of these players. I need a wide receiver and three flex plays out of this between Deontay, Antonio Gibson, Travis Fulgham, Keelan Cole, and Henry Ruggs. So he needs to pick four of those five.
That's tough. I think I'm iffy on Deontay Johnson, just because obviously we know what he can do whenever healthy. But man, like I think the worst beneficiary of Chase Claypool emerging is Deontay Johnson. When you look at a guy like Juju, who's already solidified in that number one role, James Washington is having himself a fairly decent 2020 campaign. Deontay Johnson, at times has looked great, and at times he hasn't looked great. The ball security issues are still there. Now we have a little bit of an injury problem. And sure, it's only week 7 of the NFL season, but the best ability is availability, and Deontay Johnson hasn't provided that thus far. So I would definitely I would side with the other players aside from Johnson. I do really like Gibson, but you already kind of touched on him. We've talked about Fulgham before the show. I think regardless of who's in the lineup, excuse me, whether it's a guy like Sean Jackson or Alshon Jeffrey or Jalen Rager, and I think he's proved that he deserves to have a piece of the pie in Philadelphia's offense. So.
Yeah, I mean, not that I necessarily disagree with the thing on Deontay because I do question what his role will be like right away coming back when you talk about the emergence of Chase Claypool and Washington, if not for Claypool's last catch, would have led the team in receiving yards last week. Um, so yeah, I question his role, but even more than that, I think that I question Keelan Cole here because I was expecting DJ Chark to miss time and he didn't. He ended up playing last week. Granted, wasn't incredibly effective or anything like that. But I would rather have, say, Deontay is, the third or fourth option in Pittsburgh's offense. I think I would take that as opposed to the, number two or three option in Jacksonville's offense.
No, definitely, yeah.
So I think that if you're talking about this, having to use 4 out of the 5, and I'll take the boomer bust of Henry Ruggs as well because he seems like he's kind of starting to carve out a role there. Gibson to me is the safest bet because he's guaranteed the touches at the running back position. So I think that I would be using for sure Antonio Gibson, for sure Travis Fulgham on Thursday Night Football coming up, for sure Ruggs, and then it's between Deontay and Cole, and I think I would choose slightly Deontay Johnson, even though it's a question mark. Obviously, coming off injury, how much can Ben trust him? With what he's done with the ball recently, and he hasn't finished now at 2 straight games where he's exited early, and then obviously missing a week due to the back injury. So I don't love it by any means because I would like to see. I'm sitting Deontay, assuming he plays this week, just to kind of see how he works himself back into the offense. And I have pretty solid options though in that league. In this, your options aren't that great, so I'd probably be playing him over a guy like Keelan Cole.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, obviously Deontay is one of the more talented young receivers in the league. I mean, I think both of us were on the hype train prior to the season started, and I'm still on. I still think he's a phenomenal player.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly, yeah. But there's a lot of runners in this marathon, especially in the Pittsburgh Marathon as well. So we'll see. I think Keelan Cole presents more of an opportunity just with everybody around him. But man, like Cole hasn't looked phenomenal whenever he has played, aside from a game or two. So.
Right. Okay. So I will tell you guys about my top 5 quarterbacks here as soon as I tell you guys about Manscaped. I don't know if I did this ad read on this show yet. I don't think so. But this is the fall ad read for Manscaped. Autumn is in the air, and Manscaped is here to ensure that you don't carve your pumpkins when you're grooming. By pumpkins, we actually mean your boys downstairs. In fact, Manscaped is on a mission to change the way that you approach caring for your balls. And great news, they just released their products in the UK, Canada, and Australia. So I have one, or I should say I have all the stuff. Tyler has all the stuff. A lot of our friends have all the stuff. It's awesome. The new Lawnmower 3.0, which they spent 18 months perfecting. Comes with replaceable ceramic blade with advanced skin safe technology, what helps reduce grooming accidents. Their new weed whacker, which I don't know if I've talked about on here because it's relatively new, is the new ear and nose hair trimmer that uses that same skin safe technology when you're trimming those delicate nose hairs of yours. The crop care kit includes the crop preserver ball deodorant. Everyone knows pumpkin spice lattes and ball deodorant go hand in hand. Crop cleanser body wash, which I've talked about on here a lot. A full body wash that you can also use on your hair. So it's kind of like a 3-in-1. The crop mop ball wipes. You never know when opportunity is going to strike, so you should always be prepared. Plus, you don't want to stink when you sit around Thanksgiving dinner. That is very true. If you suffer from stank foot or stand on your feet all day, then I have a product for you as well. The foot duster, the foot deodorant, the cooling tea tree oil offers a pleasant experience for the stankiest feet and allows you to take your shoes off in confidence. I recently bought that as well, and Tyler has it as well because he works at Enterprise. He's on his feet a lot, and he said he used the word rank. He said his feet are rank after a day's work, so he needed it. The Manscaped Refined Cologne is a cost-effective way to smell clean and fresh for your date. I use that on a regular basis as well. The Crop Cleanser Hair and Body Wash was designed with aloe vera and sea salt to leave your skin clean, fresh, moisturized, and reinvigorated. The formulations are all vegan, cruelty-free, dye-free, sulfate-free, so you know your manhood is in good hands. If any of these products interest you, you can head to manscaped.com right now. Use the code 412 at checkout, and you will get 20% off plus free shipping when you do so. Again, that's manscaped.com, code 412, and you get 20% off plus free shipping.
I can't wait to tell my kids about your legendary ad reads.
You can show them the videos too. Just go back on the YouTube and find the old videos and be right there.
Yeah, going to be like, how did Uncle Smitty get so famous? Like, why does he get paid millions of dollars a year to read ads? And I'm like, kids, come here.
Okay, so top 5 quarterbacks. Number 5, this one's for Beefy. He's had a couple down weeks in a row, but I'm going Josh Allen as my QB5 facing the New York Jets. And why is he QB5? Because he's facing the New York Jets.
You sold me already. No, not more needs to be said. Obviously, we know what Josh Allen can do. There was a bit of a tough sledding for him last week in week 6, but yeah, I mean, the ability he presents both through the air and on the ground. Him and Stephon Diggs, that connection just seems better week in and week out. We also have guys like John Brown and Cole Beasley there, as well, obviously. And yeah, anytime you get to line up versus the New York Football Jets, good things are bound to happen. So I would absolutely buy Josh Allen as a top 5 quarterback this week.
My number 4 is going to be Pat Mahomes going against Denver. And the reason that he's 4 and not higher, I kind of talked about it already, is the numbers against Denver, not that great. And granted, this isn't the same Denver defense, but also, is it the same Kansas City offense? I mean, we haven't seen Pat Mahomes put up huge numbers for the better part of this year. I mean, he had an absolute massive game on Monday Night Football against the Ravens. But beside that, has he really warranted being a top 3 quarterback play in fantasy? I don't think so. And a lot of that is due to, let's talk about Tyreek Hill, a guy that is not coming in the top 5 receivers yet again this week, and he hasn't been a top 5 play all year. I mean, he just has not put up those numbers. He hasn't had that breakout game yet. Maybe it comes against Denver here, but until I see it, I don't trust Pat Mahomes as a top 3 play. Now, I'll put him at number 4, still think he'll have a solid game. And, going against Denver here, again, it's not the same Denver defense. They don't really scare me all that much. But this is more about Kansas City's offense, not looking the exact same that they have in the past. And maybe Le'Veon Bell helps that offense out quite a bit. We'll see. We'll see what kind of role he has in that offense, because Clyde Edwards-Helaire absolutely took over their last game. So I don't know what it's going to look like. But Pat Mahomes, QB4, and it's not necessarily a slight at him. I just like the 3 guys ahead of him a little bit more.
No, I can't fault you for not thinking at all. And obviously we think Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league outside of fantasy, just when evaluating real life stuff. But fantasy hasn't really produced, and neither has Lamar Jackson. The top 2 consensus quarterbacks going into 2020 haven't really been the guys that people have drafted them to be. And, a lot of that can be placed on Tyreek Hill. Some of that can be placed on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And, him not exactly having the passing role a lot of people thought he was going to have early on. But no, he's not putting up 50-point games anymore. But I don't really think he needs to, at this point. The Chiefs have struggled, thus far through 2020, at least, to extents people didn't think they were going to. But obviously, Mahomes is going to be around that top 5 week in and week out. So I'm actually interested to see who you have above him.
So QB3, another guy coming out off an absolutely terrible performance. If I was still doing my studs and duds, he would be my dud quarterback. Aaron Rodgers going against the Houston Texans here is going to be QB3 for me. I think the Texans defense stinks. I think that this is a game where a lot of points could be scored, but the only way that's going to happen is if Deshaun Watson makes it a shootout, which at that point, then my top 5 is going to be busted because Deshaun Watson probably comes in as number 5. Spoiler alert, he's not my top 2. So Aaron Rodgers going against the Texans here. I think that he bounces back in a big way. I think he needs to bounce back in a big way. Devontae Adams, came back last week, and I really expected them to be able to do some damage against Tampa Bay, but it didn't happen. Tampa Bay's defense with a very, I'm here statement from those guys. So I'd like him to bounce back this week against the Texans. I don't think all that much of the Texans defense. And, I think a lot about that Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams connection. And hey, what we've seen from maybe they actually have a tight end in Green Bay now. I don't know. But the run game, the pass game, I like Green Bay's offense a lot this week. I like Aaron Rodgers as a top 3 play.
Yeah, the options are definitely there in Green Bay when it comes to Aaron Jones catching the ball out of the backfield or Devontae Adams catching the ball at the wide receiver spot. And like you said, it looks like Robert Tonyan is a viable option moving forward for them. I think Aaron Rodgers said it best. They needed that loss. They were riding a little bit too high. They got on their high horse a bit, and Tampa Bay knocked them back down to earth. And I think you're going to see a completely different team than we saw last week.
He's not obviously, but Robert Tonyan, it definitely it came out that he was working out with George Kittle in the offseason and stuff, and he looks like he's trying to emulate him. He's obviously not George Kittle, but you can see a little bit of that in his game. And even the way he looks and the way he plays, it looks like you're watching George Kittle light.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad thing either, but in both blocking and pass catching, he looks like a beast, and, that's exactly what George Kittle does. So I feel like if you're going to work out and try to emulate anybody, it probably should be him.
QB2 is going to be Russell Wilson going against Arizona. And spoiler alert, I'll just give you my number 1 as well. They're in the same matchup. I'm going Kyler Murray against Seattle. Now, I'll start with Kyler Murray here because he was not good from an efficiency standpoint in that Monday Night Football game. He completed about a third of his passes against the Dallas defense, which is absolutely terrible. Seattle's defense, though, not much better when it comes to covering the pass, which is, you have DeAndre Hopkins as your number 1 receiver this week, and I would agree had I been doing wide receiver rankings. I think that this has the makings of a lot of points being scored in this game, and that's why both quarterbacks are going to have a huge game. The only reason I have Kyler a little bit higher is for the reason that he just had a 30-point game when he completed 10 passes. And he does it by also rushing for 80 yards and a score on the ground. And that could very well happen in this matchup here. And, if he does that, there's no reason that he shouldn't be, QB 1, 2, or 3. And just with how many points I expect to be scored in this game, Kyler's number 1, Russ is number 2, who I expect a big game from Russ as well. You talked about DK Metcalf. He's got Tyler Lockett. He's got that run game. Chris Carson, who can also catch balls out of the backfield. I like both these offenses to score 30 plus.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of them being number 1 and number 2 as well. I think I would trust Russell Wilson just a little bit more than Kyler Murray, but the matchup for Murray is.
Oh, if I was trying to be safer, absolutely.
But hey, we do not do that here. We do absolutely not care. Not. Quote Mike Tomlin. But I think some of the blame needs to be put on the Cardinals receivers for Kyler Murray's stats.
Sandy Isabella doing.
Yeah, there were a couple of drops, that the Cardinals receivers had, but then again, Kyler missed a lot of receivers on Monday night, so we'll see. The matchup, like I said earlier, is a lot better for Kyler than it is a guy like Russell Wilson. But then again, Russell Wilson is 10 times the passer that Kyler Murray wants to be. So, one or two, they're both probably going to finish top 5. So I can't fault you at all for that.
Right.
All right, yeah, just moving on. Final position, the good old running back, the savior of the fantasy football community. Number 5 might surprise you, actually. Going to be Ezekiel Elliott versus the Washington football team. Had his worst outing of the season, 12 points. I think he fumbled, what, 2 or 3 times on Monday night? It's just not the Ezekiel Elliott that we thought he was going to be. And I think he's due for a bounce back season, not season, game. Andy Dalton's at quarterback now. The Cowboys offense is going to need to heavily rely on a guy like Ezekiel Elliott. We saw that on Monday night. I believe he had 8 receptions during the game versus the Cardinals, and I definitely expect his involvement in the passing game to continue to kind of hover around those numbers. Maybe not 8 per game, but he'll definitely see some action in the passing game. But yeah, if Monday night was any indication, they're going to use Ezekiel Elliott early and often, and probably more often than a typical often for a guy like Zeke. And the Washington football team, a middle of the road defense, and not great, not superb when it comes to defending against running backs. And yeah, I just think Zeke's due for a bounce back game.
Yeah, I mean, there were at times in that game where, they were giving him like drives off and putting in Tony Pollard because of the fumbling issues. But he's got to figure that out because that team needs him. And I don't see, them going into this game and taking from his workload because of those fumbles. They need him to be part of the solution. And I think that he's going to have every opportunity to be part of that solution. So again, this is a division that's still wide open. If Dallas is going to win, they need, better days for Ezekiel Elliott, and better days are ahead. I think at this point, it's just a mental thing. He's got to get past it, and I think that he will. But, it's not something that it's easy for us to say. He can't just flip a switch and forget about that. Apparently, there are guys that can do that, and those are what make them so great. But it's a fumbling issue that is, we've seen for a while now. He said he wasn't going to fumble the whole year, and then he fumbled 2 times on back-to-back drives. So better days are ahead for Ezekiel Elliott, and why not start this week? The volume alone should have him in the top 5.
Yeah, if his worst outing is a 12-point outing where he still saw the ball a ton, I'd like to take my chances on that as a fantasy owner. But speaking of guys who did not have a great day, my running back number 4 is going to be Kareem Hunt versus the Cincinnati Bengals this week. If
expected,
Kareem Hunt did not do a damn thing last week versus the Steelers defense, and nobody did a damn thing versus the Steelers defense, except for Rashard Higgins on the one-off touchdown catch. That's right. Never disrespected. But no, you should bounce back in a big way versus a Bengals defense that's allowing nearly 20 points per game to running backs. Nick Chubb's obviously still out, so Kareem Hunt is still the guy. And both running and passing, he looks to be the guy. The guy behind him, I'm blanking on his name.
Dearness Johnson.
He only saw time whenever it was garbage time late in the fourth quarter. So it's obviously Kareem Hunt's backfield to lose. I know we've kind of been monitoring that situation, but it definitely looks like Hunt's the guy. And versus the Bengals defense in a game that shouldn't be a blowout either way for the Browns or the Bengals, game flow should keep Hunt active in both facets of the game.
Yeah, the Bengals are not the Steelers. So as I just said about better days being ahead for Ezekiel Elliott, there's not going to be worse days ahead for Kareem Hunt, I don't think. Obviously when Nick Chubb comes back, that's going to change what his production's like. He was still a guy that was putting up RB2, flex value with Nick Chubb there. Without Nick Chubb there, he's an RB1 on most weeks. He's not going to be playing against the Steelers front 7 week in and week out. So this matchup with the Bengals is a, solid one. And as you mentioned, we expect Cincinnati to be able to kind of put up some points as well on a Cleveland defense that isn't very good. So if Cincinnati can stay in this game, as you just mentioned, Cleveland's going to be running the ball. They're also going to be passing the ball. He's the pass catching back for them, so it's a good situation for Kareem Hunt this week against Cincinnati.
Yeah, and going from somebody who did absolutely nothing to a guy who had his week saved by a touchdown, my running back is going to be Aaron Jones versus the Houston Texans defense. Scored just 13 points last week, but if you take away the touchdown, obviously he only had 7. But things should pick up again. And I feel like we've talked about this with almost every Packers player we've mentioned. Tampa Bay defense is one of the best.
Throw that game away.
Yeah. Honestly, you definitely need to have a short memory, both as a player and as a fantasy manager. You need to take things week to week. And just looking at the matchup for Aaron Jones going against the Texans defense that allows the most fantasy points to running backs per game, you really got to like the matchup. You really got to like his involvement in both the running and passing game. And yeah, I think all of those factors bode well for a guy like Aaron Jones heading to Week 7.
Yeah, you're actually a disagreement from me. I mean, a guy who was an absolute beast every week before this. So again, I think it's just kind of a throwaway week. You got to have a short memory. It obviously frustrated the hell out of you last week, but that's in the past. You got to come right back and know that Aaron Jones is your RB1 and plug him in and play him confidently. So,
and yeah, I think the arrival of Devontae Adams, while it might not bode well for Aaron Jones' target situation, granted that wasn't, ginormous to begin with, and I think that'll help keep defenses backed up, and so they won't be able to crowd the line of scrimmage, and I think that might bode well for Aaron Jones in the long term as well with the re-arrival of Devontae Adams. But running back number 2, this might surprise you, but he's actually been having a very good year, and I feel like not a whole lot of people are mentioning him whenever it comes to top fantasy football running backs. I have Chris Carson versus the Arizona Cardinals, running back 2. He's fresh off of a bye week. What I really like about him is that whenever he doesn't get a heavy workload of carries, he's heavily targeted in the passing game, and vice versa. If he's not targeted in the passing game, they're handing the ball off to him 20, 25 times a game. He gets it done in both facets, obviously, which is the common theme of all these running backs we've been talking about so far. He himself is averaging 20 points a game. He's versus a Cardinals defense without Chandler Jones in the front 7. And I think without Zeke's fumbling problems last week, you probably see a little bit more damage done to that front 7. Nobody really scares me on that Cardinals defense, at least in the defensive line or, linebacker department. We'll see what Isaiah Simmons can continue to do, but that Cardinals defense isn't phenomenal, but it's not terrible at the same time. But Chris Carson's heavy usage versus a, at least for me, middle of the road defense, it's enough to sell me as him for RB2.
You're actually an argument from me. I'm a lot higher on Chris Carson than I feel like most people. But I feel like he's a borderline RB1 every single year, and never really gets drafted like it. So yeah, you're actually getting an argument from me. I think that game strips should be favorable for him here. And if it's not, as you mentioned, whether it be in the pass game or the run game, either way, his involvement is very heavy in the Seattle offense.
And then RB1, man, it's week to week, and
All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, basically, he continues to be at the top of the list, and rightfully so. He's coming off a bye week, and his worst season to date, with a very, very weak 19.9 points in PPR formats. It's going to be Alvin Kamara versus the Carolina Panthers. Carolina ranks 30th in fantasy points allowed in the running back, so I think he'll have a very big day. And even with the re-arrival of Michael Thomas, I still think Kamara is going to be heavily involved in the passing attack, especially considering Drew Brees seemingly can't throw a football further than 10 yards down the field. So, in Kamara, while they do a good job of rotating Latavius Murray in that lineup, Kamara's been the guy in 2020 thus far, and I just think that continues versus a Carolina defense that hasn't fared well for its running backs this year.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to say about the guy? I mean, I want to look at something real quick. Just looking at what he's done this year, season total. He has 21 more points than the number 2 running back. And he had his bye week already, which not all these guys did.
Yeah, so. No, that's like I said, his season low, his worst performance this year is a 19.9 points. Like, what a floor! What a marvelous floor for a fantasy football running back like
yeah,
that.
I mean, his matchups do get tougher when you talk about. I mean, he's still gonna, RB1 going against these guys. RB2, we'll see. Christian McCaffrey when he comes back, but we feel like maybe Mike Davis still might have a role in that Carolina offense. Who knows? Yeah. But even Kamara in some of these bad matchups, like he does against Chicago, they're giving up, the 10th fewest points. Tampa Bay giving up the 7th fewest. San Fran giving up the 2nd fewest. Denver giving up the fewest. Like his 5 of his next 6 games are against those guys. So we'll see. But he's got the safest floor in fantasy football.
I'd have to agree. I think whenever McCaffrey comes back, we'll see. I like that you brought up Mike Davis. Because that's going to be a precarious situation as well. Because I think he's earned a little bit of time and touches, especially if you just paid a guy like McCaffrey and you want to keep him healthy. You might lean more into giving Davis a couple more carries per game.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys my waiver wire stuff, and I know Donnie said he had a couple questions he was going to present. My waiver wire quarterback, speaking of Mike Davis, is going to be that same team, Teddy Bridgewater, owning just 45% of the leagues. If you need a quarterback to play this week, New Orleans has given up the most points to fantasy quarterbacks. That's who he's got, and he also knows that team very well. Spent a couple years in that system, so I think that you could do a lot worse in a pinch if you need a quarterback this week. My running back going to be Boston Scott. Obviously no Miles Sanders there. Boston Scott going against the Giants actually tomorrow night. So I'm putting this show out right away. Make sure you listen, hurry up and listen and get on this. But I'm sure there's, a ton of people that already have waiver claims in on him. With what's left in that backfield behind Miles Sanders, you expect Boston Scott to be a guy that is going to just be given all the touches in that running back room. My wide receiver, and this is kind of an under the radar one, and I don't necessarily love it for this week, but just going forward, Adam Humphries, owning just 10% of the leagues. He's got 26 targets this year, and he's also produced 2 double-digit scoring games in PPR formats. Operates in that slot better than a lot of guys, and kind of was, a coveted guy for Tennessee, and people were wondering why, when he chose Tennessee over New England when he left Tampa Bay in free agency. But this year, you're starting to see why. We didn't really see it last year. But this year he's had a little bit of an impact in that offense. Obviously, behind AJ Brown and Jonnu Smith, but he's one of the better slot receivers in the NFL, and it's starting to have a little bit of a fantasy impact. So I think if you're desperate for a flex play, you should do a lot worse. And my tight end, somehow owning just 44% of the leagues. Obviously, a lot of people either, I don't know if they didn't have the IR spot or weren't sure what the situation was going to be like. Dallas Goedert's owning 44% of the leagues, and he's going to be coming back from injury. It doesn't look like tomorrow, but possibly the following game for them. And Zach Ertz is going to be out about a month. So when Dallas Goedert does come back, it's looking like he's going to be a target monster in that tight end room. And even with Zach Ertz there, Dallas Goedert was putting up some numbers. So I really like him to put up some massive games with Zach Ertz on the shelf.
Those were all solid. I really like the Dallas Goddard pick, especially since we've both been high. I feel like both of us have been higher on Goddard than Ertz heading into this year, and then 2020 has kind of proven us right thus far.
It was kind of like you felt like Philadelphia was kind of like phasing Ertz out because they weren't paying him.
Mm-hmm.
Like Dallas Goedert was going to be the future of the tight end position, and we've heard Zach Ertz's name come up a lot in trade talks as well. So I think it was at the point for me where I was like, I think Zach Ertz is a fine player. If he's there, and he's your tight end, you're probably using him week in and week out. But as far as like real life, it looks like Philadelphia was kind of switching gears with who tight end one was going to be, knowing, not just for the present, but for the future, who their guy was going to be. So it almost became like Dallas Goedert was like the number one, with Zach Ertz is like the number two, which is the reverse of what we had seen Dallas Goedert's first couple of years in the NFL. But yeah, now with no Zach Ertz there, it's going to be, the Dallas Goedert show once he's back.
I completely agree. I do have 2 buy or sell questions for you. I was curious on your opinion on these, and just depending on the feedback we get from this, we might have to do this moving forward. So my first question for you: buy or sell? Justin Herbert will finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year. So he's currently quarterback 23, I believe. He's put together performances of 22 points, 14 points, 23, and 27. He's coming off of a bye. He looks to finish the year at least playoff wise in fantasy football. Week 13 versus the Patriots, week 14 versus the Falcons, and then week 15 against the Raiders, week 16 against the Broncos.
Yeah. You know what? His schedule isn't that bad. I'm trying to think who I would have as like my top 10 right now. I'm going to sell. I think he finishes just outside the top 10. Looking at his schedule though, I mean, Jacksonville, Denver, Las Vegas, Miami, the Jets, Buffalo, New England, Atlanta, Vegas again, Denver again, Kansas City. I mean, a lot of those games, it's either a great matchup or a terrible matchup. There's very few like middle of the pack matchups in there. I think for me, I'm just looking at it as if they're getting blown out, that's great for him from a fantasy standpoint. He's going to rack up garbage yardage, but he's going to keep them competitive in games. And I think that somewhat could hurt his fantasy value. in my opinion. And I think that, if we were talking about if the season was starting literally just right now, we felt like how we feel about Justin Herbert as we do right now, but going into the season, knowing he'd be the number one and just the way he was going to look, I think I could probably buy it. But I'm going to sell. I think he finishes, somewhere in like the 12 to 15 range at best.
Yeah, I might have to agree with you. Mostly just based off of he's just now kind of getting starts underneath his belt. Where guys like Mahomes and Jackson and everybody else is going to be considered a top 10 quarterback have already gotten like a fairly decent head start on him. I'm a really big believer in Herbert for the rest of the season. I picked him up, after Dak Prescott got hurt in my league. So obviously, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and when it comes to that, but Herbert's looked phenomenal thus far. He's got weapons all around him. He looks great, but yeah, I definitely agree. I do think he finishes just outside of the top 10 this year, so we'll have to sell with you as well. And my second one going to be interesting, I guess is one way to put it. Buy or sell, Jimmy Graham will finish as a top 5 fantasy tight end to end of the season. And I know you're laughing, but he's tight end 6 right now.
No, because it's just like, it's funny that this is a question, but like he's looked legit in Chicago. Top 5 though, man. I mean, we mentioned it's a marathon, not a sprint. And even though Jimmy Graham has looked pretty solid there, I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I need to see him do it continually, and while the tight end position is very sparse, he just doesn't produce top 5 tight end numbers in my mind, and there's still a lot of mouths to feed. We saw that last week. Cole Kmet caught a touchdown pass in a red zone instead of Jimmy Graham. So yeah, I mean he's looked great so far. That's really good to see because he's during his heyday he was one of the more dominant tight ends. Both fantasy and real life football. But yeah, I just can't buy it.
No, yeah, I'm gonna have to sell that. I think because, granted, I haven't seen a whole lot week in and week out from Mark Andrews, but I have my 4 who I think will definitely finish in the top 5, and that's when I get back to like it's a marathon, not a sprint. When it comes to by the end of the season, I fully expect Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, and Andrews to have 4 of those spots. Then you're talking about one spot up for grabs. And I can think of a couple guys who I think I'd have in front of him, whether it be like Mike Gesicki in Miami, who just had a goose egg. You want to talk about guys that he'd probably be my dud of the week to the tight end position because he's looked phenomenal before that. Now he's getting a rookie quarterback who's probably going to rely a lot on the tight end position.
Mm-hmm.
So I like him for the rest of the season. If not for him, I mentioned, again, another guy with a rookie quarterback, Hunter Henry, who's in my top 5 this week, TJ Hawkinson. There's just too many guys I think that I would put in front of when you talk about how many weeks are still left, how many points they're going to score for the rest of the season in front of Jimmy Graham for me to confidently say I could buy him finish inside the top 5.
Yeah, no, that's about it. It's first edition of what might be many of the buy or sells on this fantasy show. So
I want to say too, with getting back to Justin Herbert real quick. My thing with him too is you hear a lot of people talk about a rookie wall, and he obviously hasn't hit that yet, but he very well could at some point, especially with how early they had their bye. Now he's on a grind for the rest of the season, playing every single week. At some point, you got to feel like he's going to have a week or two where he doesn't look like the quarterback we've seen so far.
Oh, no, definitely. But I mean, we also have to take into consideration that same thing's happening with Lamar Jackson right now. One of the number 1 undisputed fantasy quarterback going into this year. So I feel like every quarterback at one point or time in the season is just going to have that game where that's stretch of games where they're just going to play, like they don't deserve to have a starting spot. But at least for me, I love Herbert's upside. He's definitely proven me wrong. I was not super high on him coming into the draft, but yeah, he's looked everything like the quarterback the Chargers drafted him to be.
And on the reverse side of what I just said, we haven't seen probably the worst of what he's going to look like this year. Maybe we haven't seen the best though either.
That is true, and I feel like we've seen a good, like a fairly solid amount of good from him. We haven't really seen anything bad. We haven't seen Herbert kind of have to fight through the adversity of a multi-interception quarter or anything like that. So no, that's a really good point. I don't think we've seen the worst of Herbert yet, and how he'll be able to roll with the punches.
Right. Okay. Well, if you don't have anything else, I think that wraps it up.
No, that's about it for me. Fantasy season is chugging along, man. We're already halfway through it before the playoffs. So yeah, this is nuts how fast time's flying.
Right. Okay. Well, I do want to mention to everybody yet again about Rocking Around the 412 year three. We have two families now that we have that we're going to be providing the Christmas for. Again, if you guys aren't familiar with the mission, this is the third year that we've done Rocking Around the 412. Last year, what we decided to do was, get more hands on with it. We wanted to find families in our areas and provide Christmas for those children that otherwise wouldn't be provided with that Christmas. And, we loved it so much that this year we're doing the exact same thing. So, like I said, we have two families. For every $1,000 we raise, we'll add a new family. And we actually are, getting very close to 3,000. So if we get to that mark, we're going to add a third family and be able to provide Christmas for them. So we're very excited about that. And if you donate at least $20, you're going to be eligible for some great prizes. We got a ton of autographed memorabilia for Steelers, Pirates, and Penguins. That's mostly what we cover on here. Talking with my mom, she does think we should add some stuff to incentivize people that aren't necessarily sports fans, even though this is a sports show. Maybe like some Bath and Body Works stuff or something like that, like some gift baskets, stuff like that. But we'll see. But as of now, we have 9 different prizes. So if you donate at least $20, you'll be eligible for any of those. And you can find all the information. Oh wait, it's not our pinned tweet right now because we have a couple interviews coming up. If you search Around the 412 and just the word rockin', it will come up right away. But yeah, and a reminder as far as interviews, tomorrow, Steelers linebacker Ulysses Gilbert will be on the show with us. And then on Monday, not sure how many people will necessarily care about the Pirates that are watching or listening to this show, but if you are also a Pirate fan, Pirates third baseman T. Brian Hayes will be joining the show on Monday, which we're very excited about. Other than that, I will tell you guys one more time about Teach Barbershop and we'll get out of here. Teach Barbershop is an old-fashioned barbershop. It's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturday, and every Tuesday he does $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. So thanks again for listening to Around the 412. This has been a presentation of Crowworthy. Winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Around the 412. Follow them at Crowworthy, and visit the Pittsburgh City page at crowworthy.com for podcasts such as this one, blogs, gambling advice, and more. It's been Donnie. It's been Smitty. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.